The woman I had spent 3 years trying to forget was bleeding in a hospital hallway when she grabbed my arm and whispered, "Tell them you're my husband." I stared at her wedding ringless hand, then at the nurse rushing toward us, and felt every lie I had buried come back to life at once. She was supposed to be a stranger to me now. She was supposed to be someone I had forgiven but never intended to see again. Yet there she was, trembling against my chest, begging me to pretend I still belonged to her. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. My name is Nolan Pierce, and before that afternoon, I thought I understood the difference between loving someone and letting them go. I had spent the previous 3 years learning how to live with an empty space inside me, the kind that doesn't hurt every morning anymore but still aches when an old song plays in a grocery store or when you pass a restaurant where you once celebrated something you thought would last forever. Her name was Elise Mercer. She had been my closest friend, my partner, and for a short, beautiful time, the woman I believed I would grow old beside. We met when we were both 29, at a community fundraiser where I was helping repair a broken stage and she was organizing donations for a children's literacy program. She had flour on one cheek because she had spent the morning baking cookies, and she laughed when I told her she looked like she had lost a fight with a bakery. That laugh became one of the sounds I loved most in the world. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. We argued about money, about my habit of working through weekends, about her tendency to say yes to everyone who needed help and then wonder why she had no energy left for herself. But we also built a life in the small spaces between those arguments. Sunday breakfasts. Grocery store races. Long drives with the windows down. Her falling asleep with her head on my shoulder while I pretended not to notice because I didn't want to move. When my father died, Elise was the person who sat beside me on the porch for hours without trying to make me feel better. She simply stayed. I thought that was what love meant. Staying. Then, slowly, something changed. Elise began disappearing for hours. She stopped answering messages. She became protective of her phone and would turn the screen face down whenever I entered the room. At first I convinced myself she was overwhelmed. Her mother had been ill, her job was demanding, and she was volunteering more than ever. But suspicion is like a crack in glass. Once it appears, your eyes keep finding it. One afternoon, I saw a message flash across her phone while she was in the kitchen. It said, "You promised he wouldn't find out." When I asked her about it, she went completely still. She told me it was nothing. I wanted to believe her so badly that I accepted the answer even though every part of me knew it wasn't true. 3 weeks later, I discovered the truth in the cruelest possible way. I had gone to her office to surprise her with lunch and found her standing outside with a man named Marcus Hale. He wasn't a stranger. I had met him twice at charity events. He was the director of a foundation Elise worked with, confident and polished, the kind of man who always seemed to know what to say. But that afternoon, he wasn't standing like a colleague. His hand was on Elise's waist, and she was crying into his shoulder. When she saw me, the color disappeared from her face. I didn't yell. I didn't ask for an explanation. Somehow, the quiet was worse. She followed me to the parking lot, begging me to listen. She told me there was more to the story, that Marcus had been threatening her, that she had made mistakes trying to protect someone, that she had become trapped in something she didn't know how to escape. But I couldn't separate the truth from the lies anymore. All I heard was that she had betrayed me and hidden it for months. I took off the key to our apartment and placed it in her hand. I remember telling her, almost calmly, that I loved her too much to spend the rest of my life wondering whether she was telling me the truth. She cried. I walked away. For 3 years, I heard almost nothing about her. We divided our belongings through mutual friends. I moved to a different neighborhood and poured myself into my work. I didn't date seriously. Every time someone asked why, I said I wasn't ready. The truth was simpler. I was afraid that if I loved someone again, I would eventually discover another secret waiting behind their smile. Then came the hospital. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon, and I had gone to St. Catherine's Medical Center to visit my older sister, Mara, who was recovering from a minor procedure. I had just stepped out of the elevator when I heard a commotion near the emergency entrance. A paramedic was pushing a stretcher through the doors, and for some reason, I glanced over. Then I saw her. Elise. Her hair was tangled, her face was pale, and there was blood on the sleeve of her gray sweater. For one impossible second, neither of us moved. Then she recognized me. Her eyes widened with something that looked like terror, not surprise. She pushed herself up from the stretcher despite the paramedic telling her to stay down and reached for me. Her fingers closed around my arm with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Tell them you're my husband." I thought I had misheard her. After everything, after 3 years of silence, that was the first thing she wanted from me? A nurse approached and asked whether I was family. Elise looked at me with tears running silently down her cheeks. I could have told the truth. I could have stepped away. Instead, I heard myself say that I was her husband. The words tasted like a betrayal of everything I had promised myself. They rushed Elise into an examination room, and I stood outside feeling like a man who had accidentally walked into someone else's life. A few minutes later, a doctor asked me about her medical history. I knew the answer to almost every question. Allergies. Medication. Blood type. The scar on her left knee from falling off a bicycle at 13. The fact that she hated needles and squeezed someone's hand when she was frightened. The doctor looked at me with concern and said Elise needed emergency surgery. There had been an accident involving a delivery van. She had suffered internal injuries, and they needed consent for a procedure because they had not yet located her family. I stared at the paperwork. My hand shook. Then I asked where her family was. The doctor hesitated and told me Elise had listed no emergency contact. That made no sense. Her mother was alive. Her younger brother lived nearby. She had friends. Why would she leave all of them off the form? That was the first question. The second came when a nurse quietly told me that Elise had been carrying an envelope addressed to me. Inside was a photograph. It showed Elise standing beside a little girl who looked about 6 years old. The child had dark curls, a gap between her front teeth, and Elise's unmistakable green eyes. On the back of the photograph, in Elise's handwriting, were 6 words that made my stomach drop. Her name is Sophie. She knows you. I couldn't breathe. For 3 years, I had believed Elise's betrayal had been about another man. Now I was looking at a child I had never known existed. A hospital social worker named Dana Ortiz found me sitting alone in the waiting area, holding the photograph so tightly that its edges had bent. She told me Sophie was in the pediatric unit. Elise had asked the paramedics to make sure someone named Nolan Pierce was contacted if anything happened to her. I walked to Sophie's room with my heart pounding. She was sitting by the window with a coloring book on her lap. When she saw me, she stared for several seconds. Then she slowly stood. "You're Nolan," she said. I nodded. She looked at me with the strange certainty only a child can have and whispered, "Mom said you would come if she was ever too scared to ask you yourself." I sat beside her. "Is your mom going to be okay?" Sophie looked down at her coloring book and said, "She said she might have to tell you everything." And then I understood something terrifying. Elise hadn't asked me to pretend to be her husband because she wanted protection from hospital staff. She had asked because she believed she might die before she could explain the truth. Hours later, a doctor came out and told me the surgery was successful. Elise was alive, but unconscious. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt anger rising inside me, because there were now too many questions and nobody awake to answer them. Who was Sophie? Who was her father? Why had Elise hidden her from me? And why had she spent 3 years carrying my name in her emergency instructions? While Sophie was being watched by the social worker, I called Mara and told her everything. She came to the hospital immediately. She looked at the photograph, then at me, and quietly asked the question I had been too afraid to ask. Could Sophie be yours? I laughed bitterly. No. Elise never told me she was pregnant. Mara's face tightened. You weren't there when she left. Those words stayed with me. I remembered the last month before our breakup. Elise had been exhausted. She had been nauseated. I had assumed she was stressed. One morning, I had found a pregnancy test in the bathroom trash and asked her about it. She told me it wasn't hers. I had believed her. Now I wondered if that had been another lie. The next morning, while Elise remained unconscious, a man arrived at the hospital asking for her. It was Marcus Hale. The moment I saw him, 3 years of anger came rushing back. He looked older. Tired. Frightened. He approached me and said he knew who I was. I told him he had no right to be there. He didn't argue. Instead, he handed me a sealed envelope. Elise wanted you to have this if she couldn't tell you herself. Inside was a letter. She wrote that Sophie was my daughter. My knees nearly gave out. Elise explained that she had discovered she was pregnant shortly before I confronted her about Marcus. But Marcus had discovered financial misconduct inside the foundation where Elise worked. He had been pressured by someone above him, and Elise had become involved because she was trying to protect vulnerable families whose donations were being misused. She had secretly collected evidence. When the people responsible discovered what she knew, they threatened her and, eventually, threatened the baby. Marcus had been helping her expose them, which was why she had been seen with him. Their relationship had never been romantic. The betrayal I had spent 3 years hating her for had been a story I had never actually known. Elise had tried to tell me, but on the day I saw her with Marcus, she panicked. She believed the people watching her had followed me. She thought telling me about the pregnancy would put me in danger too. But there was something worse. She wrote that she had eventually tried to contact me after Sophie was born. She had called my old number, sent letters to my old apartment, and even visited my workplace once. But Marcus discovered that the people threatening them were monitoring her movements, and she stopped. Then came the sentence that destroyed me. I thought staying away from you was the only way I could keep you alive. I folded the letter against my chest and cried like I hadn't cried since my father died. Not because I suddenly forgot what Elise had done. Because I finally understood how much of my life had been built around a misunderstanding. That afternoon, Elise woke up. When I entered her room, she looked at me and immediately began crying. I lied to you, she whispered. I sat beside her bed. You did. I hurt you. You did. She closed her eyes. I thought you hated me. I did, I admitted. For a long time. Her face crumpled. Then I reached across the bed and took her hand. But I don't know if I ever stopped loving you. She looked at me as though those words frightened her more than anything else. I told her about Sophie. I told her I wanted to meet my daughter properly, not as a stranger who had appeared in her life because of an accident. I told her that whatever happened between us, Sophie deserved honesty, stability, and 2 adults willing to put her first. Elise squeezed my hand. I don't expect you to take me back. I know. I don't deserve it. Maybe not, I said gently. But forgiveness isn't always about deserving. She began to cry again. Over the next several weeks, the truth about the foundation came out. Marcus cooperated with investigators, and the people responsible were eventually charged. Elise recovered slowly. Sophie and I began building a relationship that felt awkward at first and then strangely natural. We went to the park during the day. We ate ice cream after school. She showed me her drawings and insisted I learn how to braid hair, even though my first attempt looked like a tangled rope. One afternoon, she handed me a drawing of 3 people standing beneath a bright yellow sun. "That's us," she said. I looked at the picture. "Us?" She nodded. I asked who the third person was. She smiled and pointed at Elise, who was sitting nearby on a bench, watching us. For the first time in years, Elise laughed. Not the nervous laugh from the hospital. Not the broken laugh from our last days together. Her real laugh. The one I remembered from the bakery. Months passed. We didn't magically become a family overnight. There were difficult conversations. There were days when old pain returned. There were moments when I wanted to ask why she hadn't trusted me enough to tell me the truth. There were moments when she asked why I hadn't stayed long enough to hear her explanation. We learned that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply stops the past from controlling every decision in the future. One Saturday afternoon, Sophie was playing in the yard while Elise and I sat on the porch. Elise looked at me and said she was still afraid. "So am I told her. "Of what?" "Of losing this." She smiled sadly. "You already lost me once." "I know." "And?" I looked toward Sophie, who was chasing bubbles across the grass. "And maybe some things aren't meant to be restored exactly as they were." Elise nodded. "Maybe they become something new." I reached for her hand. That was the beginning of our second chance. Not a fairy tale. Not a perfect reunion. Something better. Something real. A year later, Sophie asked me to walk her into her first day of school. She held one of my hands and Elise's with the other. At the entrance, she looked up at both of us and said, "You're not going anywhere, right?" I knelt in front of her. "No," I told her. "We're staying." And I realized that was the promise I had been trying to understand all my life. Love wasn't always the person who never hurt you. Sometimes love was the person who hurt you, regretted it, told you the truth, and worked every day to become someone worthy of your trust again. Sometimes family wasn't the family you planned. Sometimes it was the family life unexpectedly placed in your hands. And sometimes forgiveness didn't mean pretending the pain never happened. It meant deciding that the pain would not be the final chapter. Speech balloon special request: before the story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in this situation? If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more meaningful and inspiring stories. Your support encourages us to keep creating stories that touch hearts around the world. I still think about that hospital hallway sometimes. I think about the woman who grabbed my arm and asked me to tell one impossible lie. At the time, I thought she was asking me to become her husband for a few minutes. I didn't know she was really asking me to become a father, to hear a truth that had been buried for years, and to decide whether the love I had lost could become something different. She taught me that life rarely gives us the clean endings we imagine. Sometimes it gives us broken pieces and asks what we will build with them. And if there is one thing I know now, it is this: the greatest second chances don't come from forgetting what happened. They come from remembering it clearly, choosing compassion anyway, and having the courage to love differently the next time. Because sometimes, the person standing in front of you isn't asking you to return to the past. They're asking you to help create a future neither of you believed was still possible. If you want, I can continue the story from Nolan's perspective, summarize the key takeaways about forgiveness and second chances, explain the emotional journey of Nolan and Elise in simple terms.